Our next speaker is Michael Levine-Clark. Michael is the collections librarian and professor at the University of Denver's Penrose Library, and co-editor of the journal Collaborative Librarianship, co-editor of the ALA Glossary of Library and Information Science, 4th edition, and co-editor of the Encyclopedia of Library and Information Science, 4th edition. He's been a member or chair of many committees within library organizations and has served on a variety of national, international, publisher, and vendor library advisory boards. He writes and speaks regularly on strategies for improving academic library collection development practices, including the use of ebooks in academic libraries and the development of demand-driven acquisition models.
All right, thank you. How's this little bit of feedback there, huh? How's that? Better? Okay. So when you go to a library conference, any library conference over the last 3 years or so, you will hear, that one's still on, that's the problem. When you go to a library conference over the last several years, you cannot avoid hearing presentations about patron-driven acquisition, demand-driven acquisition, or monographs. It is something that libraries are very interested in, and it's something that makes a lot of sense for monographs. The idea being that instead of buying a book up front, you wait for use, and you purchase or you even pay for a short-term loan of an ebook at the point of need. Some libraries have experimented with article-level demand-driven acquisition, and I want to talk about what would happen if we explored that at a bigger rate than we have so far. A couple of definitions first. We tend to hear the term patron-driven acquisition when we talk about this, this practice. And patron-driven acquisition is something that libraries have always done. It's a part of all responsible collection development where you respond to your user needs. And so if a faculty member requests that we buy a book or that we subscribe to a journal, and that's patron-driven acquisition. If we look at circulation data or usage data to inform future collection development decisions, that's patron-driven acquisition. What I'm interested in, and I think what most people who are talking about patron-driven acquisition are interested in, is the idea of demand-driven acquisition. Matching that patron input to the point of need. So we can provide access to material and pay for it only when it is actually needed. And as I said, demand-driven acquisition makes a lot of sense for books. There is a high cost per use for books. Most books don't get used very much. It's probably, the average cost of the books that we buy is about $75 in my library. If half of those don't actually get used, and most of those that do get used very few times, it's a pretty high cost per use. Even if the book itself is not that expensive. There's very low overall use. 40% of the books in my library will never get used, and that's pretty typical across libraries. Most books that do get used are only going to get used once or twice. And it's an incredibly high publishing output. We buy about 20,000 to 25,000 books a year in my library, compared to about 1 million books that UNESCO estimates are published annually worldwide, so a tiny portion. Some examples of usage of books in my library, and again, why this makes sense, why demand-driven acquisition makes sense for books. 40% don't get used, and if you look, only just not under 19% of the books that we have in our collection get used 4 or more times. And these are books that have been in the library for more than a decade and have had time to be discovered. The cost of these unused books is $2.3 million. It's a lot of money for stuff that is not getting touched. And we can spend our money more wisely because you look at this, we are buying about 20,000 to 25,000 books a year compared to roughly 65,000 books that are scholarly monographs as treated on approval by YBP, which is the primary book vendor for us. A pretty good estimation of the scholarly monographic output in North America. And then roughly 200,000 books published in the US annually and about 1 million by UNESCO, or worldwide as estimated by UNESCO. And that's not even touching self-published material and gray literature. This is sort of mainstream published material. So it makes a lot of sense to talk about it for books. But what about articles? It's not as clear to me that it makes sense for articles. But I'm going to make an argument that we should be thinking about it. So the current landscape, big deals. Jonathan gave me a nice introduction there because I'm going to talk about the big deal. I'm going to talk about some of the same things he's talked about with the big deal. why the big deal is not sustainable. But we are, right now, most of us, we are buying a huge portion of our collection, of our journal collection, through big deals. We have big deals with all of those publishers that were mentioned, and I would extend it a little further and say our big deals with ACS and with Oxford and with Cambridge, and down the line, those are big deals as well. We supplement that with single title subscriptions in cases where there's a publisher that doesn't publish enough that is of value to our community. Certainly smaller societies where we have everything from that society, that it's a small deal, but it's still the same concept of a big deal. And then only after that do we supplement on some level with article level acquisition. We borrow things through interlibrary loan. If we don't have a subscription to that journal, we purchase a PDF. These are one-off deals where we give that content to the user. We end up with no availability for the next user. We're buying it and giving it away, essentially. And this works because these are titles that are not of heavy demand for our community. I think we need to be thinking a little bit more carefully and a little more consistently about moving to the article as the means of acquisition for more of the content that we're acquiring. In a print environment, it made a lot of sense. It made perfect sense. It was the only way to do it, to provide access by the title, the journal title, right? That was the only way you could get to the article. But we provide discovery at the article level. Every citation is at the article level. All of our discovery tools, all of our indexes are pointing people to the article. That's what they want. We should be thinking about how to better leverage those discovery tools to then purchase things at the article level. So why might we want to do demand-driven acquisition at the article level, and maybe why not? The problem, of course, is that the sort of usage level and output level of journals is very different from monographs. With monographs, there's a high cost per use. The cost per use for us, for the journals that manage to stay in our collection, is pretty low cost per use. If it's a high cost per use, if it's not getting a lot of downloads, we tend to cancel. And across our big deals, the cost per use is pretty low. It ranges up to about $5 per cost per use in the various big deals that we have. We have high overall use, right? There's lots of downloads that are leading to that pretty low cost per use. And it's a much smaller publishing universe, maybe 350,000 titles published that EBSCO covers as journals. Probably different estimates depending on what you want to talk about, but it's a much smaller than 1 million a year, 350,000, and those are recurring titles. So the big deal. It's cost effective for us. We get a lot of bang for the buck. We get tons and tons of titles that we wouldn't have access to any other way. Our Elsevier deal, for instance, we spend a pretty small amount of money to get every title published by Elsevier. So we have the big deal with Elsevier, and it benefits us tremendously. We're doing that consortially, that the entire Colorado Alliance of Research Libraries has access to all of the Elsevier titles. And we've leveraged that, right? We've leveraged our spending to get access together. We're a private institution. Our budget's been okay. We, until a few years ago, got an increase of more than the inflation costs every year. So we're getting about a 10% increase to our subscription budget. We could afford to go on forever with big deals until a few years ago. University of Colorado State University, they're not in the same situation as we are. And our big deals rely on our consortial partners. So I think, even if we could continue to do it, I agree with Jonathan, big deals are ultimately not sustainable. We can't do it with our budgets. Here's a different way of looking at a budget and thinking about a budget. So our budget is right about the same as Southern Illinois. We have a $5.5 million collections budget. In 2007, about 55% of our budget was going to subscriptions. It is now approaching 70%, and it will go over 70% this year if we don't do something. That hurts the monographs portion of the budget. It hurts our ability to to continue subscribing to anything other than these big deals. We need to be canceling in order to get back to where we were in 2007 in terms of the relative position of the book budget and the serials budget, the subscriptions versus one-time. We can't continue with this. And that's after, for us, only a very short period of time without increases to our budget. Libraries with decreases or longer periods of a flat budget are in a much tougher position. So how do you replace the big deal if the goal is actually to replace it? I think we're going to be moving to medium or smaller deals, right? So not the big deal, not every title from Elsevier, but maybe some portion of the titles from Elsevier, more than what we have, more than what we would have if we were doing it just on our own in the past. Right? The big deal is predicated on some set of titles that you were subscribing to before the deal began. If we were to quit today, we would have access to that subset of titles. Our usage level for titles beyond that initial pretty small portion is very, very high. There's a whole section of titles that we get access to, hundreds and hundreds of titles that we have access to that don't get used at all or get used very minimally. But there are hundreds of titles, maybe 500 or more titles from Elsevier that are used really well, and we would want to maintain access to some portion of those. I think more title-by-title selection, and I think what I want to talk about now is this idea of article-level purchasing. How do you build a model that works for libraries and that works for publishers that allows us to provide access at the article level and get out of some of these subscriptions that we're going to have to cancel whether we want to or not, whether it makes sense in terms of usage or not. So currently there are a couple of different models out there for rental of articles. And I'm not talking about interlibrary loan, which is another piece, but it doesn't really work unless you're doing only a few articles from that journal at a time. You run into copyright and can't sustain it after a very few number of articles. So interlibrary loan is pretty much irrelevant here. We do a lot of purchasing of articles at a PDF level. So we buy a PDF from a publisher. We pay $30, $40, $25, somewhere in that range. We give that article, that PDF, to the user, and we're done with it, right? They have access. We don't give access to the next user. We don't have ability of that for our collection. They do get to print it, they get to download it, they get to use that article in the same way that they would get to use an article that is part of one of our big deals, part of one of our subscriptions. But it's not part of the library collection in any way. So far, this works really well for marginal material. For material that is not going to be used very heavily, material that is maybe not in a core journal, material that is not in a core area for the library. It doesn't make sense to be doing this if you're doing, if it's a $1,000 a year subscription to that journal and you're doing $1,000 a year worth of article purchase, then you want to be subscribing. So it only works if the cost is below the cost of the annual subscription, especially in the case when that annual subscription could be rolled into a big deal for much less than the cost of that subscription. Cambridge University Press has a fairly interesting new model that they just put out in the last year, which is a short-term loan, which is a read-only short-term loan. So it doesn't have the print and the download option. It is 24-hour access. It's $5.99, which is approaching our cost for the more expensive big deals that we have. It's in line with what we would think of as an acceptable cost per use, but it's a very different type of use, right? So those uses within the big deal allow you to print it and allow you to download it, and this doesn't. And so it may be a use that is not acceptable for a patron, right? If you pay $5.99 and then can't print that article out, is that an acceptable cost? It's cheap enough, though, that it might work for relatively, for material that is more important to your collection and your collecting needs than that material that you would want to pay $30 or so for an article. So this has some real potential. So the goal here, again, is to replace the big deal on some level with similar access, similar spending level, or perhaps slightly less spending level because our budgets are not certainly not increasing. What I would like to do is replace the big deal on some level in a way that benefits libraries. It would benefit us by perhaps providing access to a wider range of journals and articles. Certainly, if we canceled our Elsevier deal and took that money that we're spending, those hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars that we're spending with Elsevier every year, and spread that out a little bit more widely, we could provide access to a wider range of journals, or perhaps more logically, a wider range of articles. It certainly frees up our budget. It gives us more flexibility to do title by title selection. It gives us more flexibility to do that cancellation when we have to do cancellation. It is I think, canceling the big deal is a benefit to libraries if we can do it in a way where we can somehow replace access to all of those titles that we're canceling. It can benefit publishers, even the publishers I think that we're canceling the big deal from, because even Elsevier, I would assume, would rather have something from us than nothing, right? So if we were to cancel across the board from Elsevier, they get nothing. If we were to be able to continue a big deal on some level and work out a way to rent articles, that would benefit them by at least maintaining some of that revenue that they're losing. It maintains the viability of these journals, especially the more marginal journals that are rolled into these big deals, which I would argue might actually not be a good thing. Some of these journals it might be better for them to go away. It increases access for our users, because that money that we're spending on the big deal now could go to other titles. I think that it benefits everybody if we can figure out models that allow us to move from the journal to the article for all of these reasons. So a possible model, a possible better model, is the same $30 or so per article download, but it's not a model where you lose access to it. It's a hosted solution. So it's available on the publisher website or a vendor website. It's available to us, and we can provide access. There's no reason for us to have access to that entire journal anymore. All of our discovery tools point to the article. Our catalog points to the journal title, but that's pretty much irrelevant. If we can point people to this article and they can click into that article, even if we have no other articles from that journal, it doesn't really matter, I don't think. And so a $30 fee or something in that range might make sense if we had perpetual access to that PDF that we could give to the next user and the next user. And maybe there would be no next user, but over the course of lots of articles, that might average down to a more reasonable cost per use. Or the iTunes model, right? We do a very cheap, 99 cents or $1.99 per article. And it's the same thing we were doing before, where you give it away to the user, but you're giving it away at a very cheap cost. It's a cost that would make it possible for more libraries to do this. It's a cost that would make it possible for users to purchase things on their own. It's a potential solution that allows us to add content that we're not adding right now. So what we need a sustainable price for this. We need the ability to keep paying for article content and providing access to our users, to articles to our users without breaking the bank, without killing our budget. We probably need a cap as libraries, right? It doesn't make sense to pay for $3,000 worth of articles from a $1,000 a year journal. At some point, we would need to own that article or own the content, or own the journal content. Whether it's at the article level or the journal level doesn't really matter. The key is that there's some point at which it doesn't make sense to keep paying. Publishers probably need a guarantee too, although we could assume that the good quality content will be discovered and will be used. And that's probably true in some cases and probably not true in some cases. And it's something that worries me. I worry about this with demand-driven acquisition in general, with monographs and with journals, that by not buying things up front, we make it impossible to publish it or more difficult to publish it. We make it harder for publishers to predict revenue. We make it harder for publishers to know how many copies of a book they're going to sell, how many subscriptions they're going to sell. And if that's the case, it makes it harder to manage that journal. It makes it harder to continue to provide access to it. And I don't want to do that. And so I worry about a model that works only for libraries, because we're forced to quit these. We're forced to give up these subscriptions at some point. Whether it's now or 5 years or 10 years from now, we're going to have to do it. And so we need to figure out something that works for publishers and for librarians. Thank you.